we have already put online. Yes, Madam Chair, we already down in the breakout room. Yes, according to that, we start at 3 because there's going to be another session of the room. Downstairs, you are the breakout. Yes. I think it's way much below where the conference. Why you have the main conference room? Take the stairs. No, I think for that, but it's just below where the conference room. Because the conference room is just up and down. There, breakout. So let me know when you're ready. When you're ready for me. Ready for me? Yes, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon to our online audience. I see we already have our online audience for the breakout session. I'm happy to also report that we already have our panelists already at the conference center, and we only have now less than an hour to be able to do our panel this afternoon. I see we have very, very interesting tax practitioners or people very interested in tax practice. I see Mr. Philip Karugaba is online. I see Rachel Nakalema is online. I see Tembo Joffrey is online. I see Charlotte Moyondi is online. Benon David is online. Mr. Andrew Kamtera, a lecturer of mine a couple of years ago, is online. You're most welcome. Sarah Awelo is online, and many more people that are still joining. For our colleagues who are physically attending the annual law conference that are still just wrapping up with their lunch, they will be joining us physically in the room. But ladies and gentlemen, it's a beautiful first day of the annual law conference. And in fact, had this annual law conference happened without talking about the elephant in the room for any business, and that is tax, probably would not have gotten the best of this very beautiful discussion at the annual law conference. But this afternoon, for the next couple of minutes, which will be by 4 p.m., we are going to be discussing taxation, trending topics in taxation. And for any business, for any legal advisor, for any decision maker, we can agree that at any one moment you will be faced with a decision to make in respect to a tax matter, or you will be faced with an advisory to make in respect to a tax matter. We are going to be having a panel of 4 very esteemed panelists who are passionate about what other people may not find so much fun. As I was hearing from some colleagues earlier on when we were catching up just before starting, that tax can be what it is, but there are people who have been at it for quite a number of years, So this afternoon we'll be having 4 panelists, and I believe that as you're online, our online audience, as you join, the online etiquette is that you keep your device muted so that we are able to hear our panelists very well. You will be able to use the chat room. We are able to get any questions, any comments that you'll be putting in the chat room. And most importantly, since it is an interactive session, you can post your chats in the chat room. You can post your questions in the chat room. And we intend to reserve at least 20 minutes to the end of our discussion to be questions from the people online, questions from the people within the physical audience, so that we keep our discussion interactive. You can't talk about tax in just 1 hour. So what we intend to achieve practically in this high-level panel discussion is we want to share insights. We want to be sharing insights and hearing our panelists share insights on what is trending, what are the trending topics, and what is trending in taxation. We want to share issues around compliance and planning, that at the end of our discussion, we want to be able to gather and pick up key things that could help us in compliance and planning. We want also to be able to achieve an understanding, of course, of the legal and regulatory framework. You know, tax is always changing. The tax law is always changing due to amendments. And I'll be shortly welcoming each of our panelists who are already here, and we'll also be sharing practical knowledge. For our online audience that has promptly kept time, I want to believe that already you can be able to access the chat room, you can be able to access the Q&A, and these are the things that we want to be able to do in this place this afternoon. 1, we want to welcome our first panelist, and she is a very distinguished tax practitioner. This is how I know. I went back and I was reading an interview that she did a year ago, and someone said that the chairperson, she was not a chairperson then, but she said separate the meaningful from the urgent and prioritize the meaningful. That is how she would work back then in her previous area of work. But ladies and gentlemen, the current chairperson of the Tax Appeals Tribunal is going to be one of our panelists, and she is a distinguished tax practitioner who has specialized in resolving tax disputes. It is no mistake that she's currently chairing the Tax Appeals Tribunal. Of course, she has overseen a number of many complex tax matters, bringing fairness and, of course, transparency to the resolution of tax disputes. Her previous experience includes working with both the public and private sectors, such as PwC, Uganda, where she was able to hone many skills on tax compliance. Ladies and gentlemen, would you join me? Even the people online, there is a function where you can clap, and we'll be able to see your claps and hear them as you join me as we welcome Mrs. Crystal Kabajwara to join the panel this afternoon. Thank you so much. For the people online, if you've never appeared before the Tax Appeals Tribunal, this is your chance that we are with the chair this afternoon. I want to welcome the next panelist, who I have had the privilege to meet this afternoon and had quite a good light chat and moment with her. I will not disclose private facts about her, but what I can tell and confirm, she's indeed a woman of steel with the things that she's able to juggle between career and home. Ladies and gentlemen, the next panelist is an enrolled advocate of the High Court who for over a decade has specialized in tax practice. She has worked with the tax authority and knows the ins and outs, and for any tax advisor or tax practitioner or any person who is advising in the resolution of a tax dispute, there is a department, if I may put it that way, in the Uganda Revenue Authority whom you will interact with. You will go to their boardrooms, you will meet them in the corridors of the Tax Appeals Tribunal, and equally as you go up in the appellate process. Ladies and gentlemen, our next panelist has exceptional knowledge in tax litigation, of course, interpreting tax laws. Most tax disputes will resolve around sometimes punctuations. How do you interpret the meaning of this punctuation, the meaning of this word? So over a decade, she has been doing this and has handled, interestingly, over 200 cases in relation to tax matters. This from the tribunal itself, the Tax Appeals Tribunal, through appeals to the High Court, to the Court of Appeal, and to the Supreme Court. Some of the things we'll be talking about this afternoon are the challenges that are around tax litigation and tax decisions that have left taxpayers and tax practitioners wondering what is the way forward. We are privileged to be joined by Mrs. Barbara Nahone Kasivante, who is representing. Mrs. Barbara Nahone Kasivante is delegated to represent the Commissioner, Catherine Donovan. Barbara, you're most welcome. Please, can you help me, online audience? Thank you for clapping as we welcome Barbara to join our panel. Ladies and gentlemen, the panel is not about ladies alone. It's a balanced panel, and I want to next welcome a very senior practitioner. He makes most of us feel like it should be fun to practice tax law because he literally breathes and lives tax practice. Mr. Akena Godfrey is a very senior practitioner. He has taught and continues to mentor many tax practitioners. He's a very seasoned tax lawyer, known for his expertise, not just in Uganda alone, but I believe and I'm aware he has participated in different international platforms. He has represented clients in very high-profile tax disputes and, of course, has provided strategic advisory services. Sometimes in my very short career, I've learned that the strategy you adopt in respect to a tax dispute will either get you a quicker win or may land your client in trouble. Mr. Akena's practice focuses on tax litigation and helping businesses develop strategies and plan to ensure tax compliance. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my absolute pleasure and privilege to welcome Mr. Akena Godfrey, a person I personally hold in high esteem. Mr. Akena, you're most welcome. And I believe when people like Philip Karugaba, thank you so much. I see Damba Hakim clapping, Damba Hakim Bule clapping. Thank you so much. The online people are clapping, and I'm encouraged by their very loud hands of applause. Last but not least, and in no particular order, words almost fail me to introduce Mr. John Jed Tusabe because of his wide experience with BDO Uganda. Mr. John Jed I've been privileged to sit in a number of workshops, in a number of conferences where he has delivered certain presentations, and when I've gone back to research what he has delivered, he made it during the presentation seem so straightforward, so simple, and when he begins to talk about matters of international taxation, you may think everyone should have them at their fingertips. Mr. John Jed Tusabe is the Director of Tax Services at BDO Uganda, so he deals with many cross-border advisories because BDO is not just in Uganda alone. He is indeed a leading authority in international taxation with significant experience in tax planning, transfer pricing. I love that term, transfer pricing. Sometimes when I see his name or almost his X or tweet, you're thinking of transfer pricing and international taxation. He has experience in cross-border tax issues, and at BDO, he has worked with a wide range of clients to develop tax-efficient strategies that align with global best practices. Ladies and gentlemen, on our panel, Mr. John Jed Tusabe will be giving us insights in international taxation, more so the animal of transfer pricing, OECD issues, and I believe that we are going to have a fruitful deliberation. It's my absolute pleasure to invite John Jed Tusabe to join us this afternoon. Thank you, online audience and our physical audience here. When it comes to tax matters, time is of the essence, so I believe that some people will be joining us and they will find us midway. But we thank God. I believe that in one way or the other, they'll be able to catch up because it's going to be a blended panel interaction and discussion. The panelists that I've invited, what I was sharing with you, are indeed truth about what they are and who they are. And without any further ado and in no particular order, usually the statement is ladies first, but this time we are going to begin with the gentlemen. I want to invite Mr. Akena in just an opening statement of a minute or two so that you hear his voice. For the people online, we want you to know when you hear a certain voice that this is the person speaking. So I'll invite Mr. Akena to introduce himself first, and he's going to be telling us one or two things about his many, many years of tax practice before we begin our Q&A. And after Mr. Akena, I will invite Barbara, who will also introduce herself in just a minute. And then I will invite John after Barbara. And after John, I'll invite the chair, Mrs. Crystal, to introduce herself, and we get into our Q&A. Mr. Akena, you're most welcome. Please.
Thank you very much, moderator. As he said, my name is Godfrey Akena. I've been in tax for the last 25 years. I started tax practice in 1997 as a young graduate from Makerere University when I joined Uganda Revenue Authority. I worked with Uganda Revenue Authority for 12 years and left in 2008 to start the East African School of Taxation because my main aim was to train young lawyers, accountants in taxation. Since then, I've been working in a law firm. I first worked with Abmac, then later with Godena. And I've also helped quite a number of countries in taxation. For example, I helped the Liberian Revenue Authority in setting up their tax training school. Last year, I helped the South Sudan Revenue Authority in drafting the new laws, both for customs and income tax, and especially to do with exemptions. So I've been in tax. I love it so much, and probably that's the only area of law that I practice. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you. Thank you, online audience, for clapping, and the physical audience here. 25 years, and 25 years indeed count for something. Barbara, I don't know if you're also going to say 25 years, but you're welcome.
No, thank you so much. My name is Barbara Nahone Ajambo. I'm Kasivante. I'm also Nalongo. I'm very happy to be here. I work with the Uganda Revenue Authority. I'm here on behalf of the Commissioner, Legal Services and Border Affairs Department, Catherine Donovan Chokunda, who could not be here. I'm the manager, appeals litigation. I handle appeals that are filed in the High Court, in the Court of Appeal, and in the Supreme Court. I'm an enrolled advocate. I have training in international tax, an advanced diploma in international taxation UK. I'm also a chartered company secretary. I have ICSA UK. So I joined the URA 13th May 2013. I've worked for 11 years. I never thought I would be saying that. And I think tax chose me. I call myself an anointed tax collector. I did not choose tax. I did not think it's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a human rights lawyer. I was so sure about it, but tax chose me. I live and breathe tax. I've grown to love it. It's all that I've done for the past decade, and I'm very excited to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Barbara. I didn't want to be the one saying the Nalongo because there could be a double tax agreement. Yes, thank you so much, Barbara. I'm going to invite John just before we have the chair, Crystal. John, you're welcome.
Thank you very much. My name is John Jetusabe. I think I'm privileged to sit here next to three great people. And when you talk of years of experience, when Bwana was mentioning 25, I was like, I'm not so far off. 25, I have tend to go. So I've done 15 years in tax practice, and I was lucky to get my initial training at the Uganda Revenue Authority in the tax audit division, courtesy of the foundation that Bwana Akena had set, because when I joined, I was always told of Akena was here, I was sitting here, and these are some of the things he did that you'll need to learn from. So Akena, thank you very much. And from my experience, tax is a very fascinating subject that whether you're a lawyer, accountant, a business person, you can never run away from tax. And that's one of the things that drew me to it. And it changes almost every day. Whether it is a change in the law, a change in international rules, a change in how our friends, Barbara, look at things. You might find that the way things have been done today, the next morning, it has changed. So you have to always adapt. And for me, I find that to be very interesting on tax matters. And my experience has been around both domestic and international tax matters, where we support clients in various jurisdictions. They have operations across different countries, and we do guide them on how to navigate tax issues across countries. And as BDO, we operate in 166 countries. So imagine that a company based, say, in US, it wants to invest in over 30 countries in Africa. And how do they set up their structure? So together with other BDO professionals in other countries, we sit down and say, what does it mean for Uganda? What does it mean for Kenya? What does it mean for South Africa? And therefore, which are the options that this client has to optimize their operations from a business perspective? So that I find it to be very interesting, and I look forward to sharing with you all. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, online audience and our physical audience. That's John, 10 years away from Mr. Kena. As Mr. Kena goes ahead, he's also following right behind. It's my pleasure to invite the chair of the tribunal to introduce herself, and also we hear what the journey has been. So far, I'm still counting on my fingers the different years, 25, 11, 15, and I'm still counting. Madam Crystal, you're welcome.
Thank you, Laston. Good afternoon. My name is Crystal Kabajwara, and I serve as the chairperson of the Tax Appeals Tribunal. I don't think I can match my colleagues' CVs here, but I'll give it a shot. I started practicing tax in 2007. I've been fortunate to have only 2 employers. The first was PwC, where I served for 17 years as a tax practitioner. And I left PwC early this year to join the Tax Appeals Tribunal as chairperson. And well, I believe over the last 17 years, I like to look at myself as a nation builder, because tax goes to the core of the socio-economic political fabric of every nation. So whether you are a tax advisor, whether you're a tax collector, a policy maker, your role ultimately should be to build trust in the tax system. So I have spent the last 17 years trying to build trust in our nation's tax system. My specialism primarily has been international tax, transfer pricing, and a lot of that really involved dispute resolution, and perhaps that's what landed me in the tribunal. And my philosophy is that dispute resolution is not just about the taxpayer and the taxman, because behind every dispute there is social needs like hospital care, health, education, there are supply chains, there are employees and their dependents, So it is always important when you're looking at a dispute to look at it holistically and not just in terms of the people who are appearing before you. So I'm looking forward to sharing my insights and my experience with you, and I hope that we can have an interactive session. Thank you.
Wow. That is worth deserving a very big hand of applause. If my math serves me well, we are looking at a panel of close to over 68 years of combined tax practice, not mixing in other areas of law, but purely tax practice. And I believe that is very, very rich. We have over close to 50 people coming to 50 people online. I see Mr. Sim Katende is online. Mr. Philip Karugaba literally was a very early bird, joined the breakaway. I see quite a number of people very passionate about tax practice, so already online, ready to hear from us, and I will not really stand in their way because our time is well spent. And we'll begin with you, Madam Chair, because 17 years being with the same employer and dealing with international tax and even how you get the passion for it is interesting. The concept that you talked about, transfer pricing. So about 2011, we have regulations on transfer pricing, and the disputes around that have been evolving. What we want to hear from you, from a person who has been in private practice, doing advisory and advising clients on resolving those disputes, now to an adjudicator who has to hear and help the persons disputing to understand where does the law fall. What are those need to know aspects when dealing with disputes such as transfer pricing?
Thank you, Laston. And I think when it comes to transfer pricing, I'll speak from a practitioner's perspective.
Yes.
And for many of you who have been around for some time in the tax field, we don't have that many transfer pricing disputes that make their way to the tribunal for adjudication. And there are reasons for that. One, transfer pricing by itself is a very complex area, very complex. It's not like VAT where you have a formulae prescribed for you, or income tax and you're told deductions are X, Y, and Z. It's not 1 + 1 = 2. It is not scientific. It's an art. It depends, everything depends on something. It's quite subjective, and it requires context, perspective, and judgment. So, one, it's complex. Two, there is not enough skills and capabilities in this area of transfer pricing. So whether it is amongst tax practitioners, the lawyers, the accountants, there are very few practitioners who have a good understanding and appreciation of transfer pricing. And whether it's on the other side, the Revenue Authority, there's limited capacity, although over the years we've seen the URA build capacity in transfer pricing. So when you combine those two factors, one, complexity, and two, limited capacity, what you're going to have when it comes to disputes is that disputes are going to be lengthy, they're going to be protracted. In fact, from my experience when I look at my experience in resolving TP disputes over the last 10+ years, there's not been a single dispute that has taken less than a year. Average time for resolving a tax dispute at audit stage is about 4 years, if you're lucky. I've handled disputes where that took 7 years, that have taken 10, 12 years. So they are quite lengthy. So by the time that dispute or the audit is concluded, there's exhaustion on both sides. So the hunter and the hunted equally get tired, and all that they are pushing for is a negotiated settlement. So that is why you find that you don't see many transfer pricing disputes making it to the tribunal or to any court of law. So how then should we improve the process or make it more efficient to ensure that these disputes actually go to the tribunal and there is jurisprudence that is created around transfer pricing? Because we have very limited jurisprudence in this area. What should we do? One, from a taxpayer's perspective, is stop aggressive transfer pricing. Many of the reasons why the disputes come up is because you have taxpayers taking very strong or aggressive positions. regarding their intercompany transactions. So if you're paying for a management service that you're not receiving, or for a trademark license but there's no trademark, you as the local subsidiary should hold your parent company accountable and challenge that invoice. That is one, from a taxpayer's perspective. Two, be compliant. If the rules require you to have documentation, that is the first line of defense for you to be able to sail through a dispute. It's no guarantee, but at least it's a starting point. And then on the other side of the revenue authority is understand the taxpayer's business. Because if you do not understand the business, you're going to spend several years coming up with the assessments, which are going to be challenged by the advisors, because these are multinationals. They can afford to hire the best accountants, the best advisors, and you're always going to be going back to zero. So there is need for a good understanding and appreciation by the taxman of the taxpayer's businesses. So those three factors really, when you look at everything holistically, explains why these disputes are so complex and protracted, and why we have limited jurisprudence in this space.
Wow. Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Now, we don't have time to go into definition of terms. So there are terms that some people are hearing, and I see some people giving us emojis online when we say transfer pricing, and we are talking about complexity. But the good news actually is that all this is available, and we have one of the pioneers of the tax schools. That is the essence. What I'm hearing from you, Madam Chair, is that in tax practice, there is no room for ignorance. If you're dealing with a complex matter, there is need to build capacity. Otherwise, when you're advising a client or dealing with something from a place of ignorance, then you won't be efficient. And I want to bring in John at that. There is this animal called OECD guidelines. And in them, there is also an aspect on transfer pricing. John, what has been the impact, if any, of the OECD guidelines on transfer pricing, and how can businesses align with these guidelines to avoid issues like double taxation? Any insights on that, John? You're welcome.
Thank you very much. Just to make sure that everyone knows what OECD is. OECD is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. These are mainly developed countries that have come together to foster a number of objectives.
Yes.
And one of the challenges they set out to address was transfer pricing. As Madam Chair mentioned, transfer pricing is complex, and each country or each party looks at it differently. So the question was, how do we have a consistent approach to guide taxpayers and tax authorities on how to allocate profits? And remember, the issue of transfer pricing comes in when the taxpayers are operating across jurisdictions. Now, Uganda adopted a model where our transfer pricing regulations mirror the guidelines of the OECD, with the exception of the requirement that even when you have local transaction, that is, transactions between resident parties who are related, those are also subject to transfer pricing, but those are smaller amounts involved. Most of the big amounts are cross-border. And with Uganda adopting that approach of saying that the OECD guidelines on transfer pricing shall be the benchmark for guiding the Uganda Revenue Authority and the taxpayers when it comes to transfer pricing documentation and determining what is the arm's length charge between the related party transactions. Now, what that means is that these OECD guidelines are not casting in stone. They keep evolving, which means that when OECD does an update, it means that you, the taxpayer or URA, you also have to automatically update yourself as to how a particular item or concept is handled. Because as Madam Chair mentioned, you have to understand the business, and business models keep evolving. We have new transactions, new models that were not there. So these rules keep changing, and that means that as tax practitioners, we need to keep abreast of what has the OECD said on this issue, so that now you can be able to align when you're complying with the transfer pricing rules. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, John. And you've just taken us into an interesting aspect when you talk about planning. When we talk about planning, after 25 years of breathing and practicing tax and training and teaching people about tax, I believe it would be very good to bring in Mr. Akena at that point. Mr. Akena, there, there are quite a number of challenges that businesses will face, but key to note is this issue of the proactive tax planning and risk mitigation. Sometimes businesses or even legal practitioners and advisors tend to look at the tax compliance as a risk. But from your experience advising on tax matters, what could be these takeaways on the importance of legal advisory services in enabling a business navigate tax disputes through probably undertaking proactive tax planning and risk mitigation?
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Tax, as you all are aware, has become very complex now. It has become complex because we now have businesses which are operating in jurisdictions where they are not present physically.
Oh, yes.
So now we have the issues of permanent establishment. We have the problem of branch, as we used to know now. It has changed, and that probably explains why even in the law now, we have an amendment to do with the permanent establishment.
Yes.
Now, how do we help? What role do we play as legal people in helping our people in tax disputes? Well, we have quite a number of things we can do, but the first thing as a tax advisor and a legal advisor is that in tax, not everything should go to court. I have learned that actually most of the things in tax can be resolved. If it is not resolved at ADR, it will go to TAT, but even at TAT, they give you that room of mediation. Again, at that stage, it can be resolved or the liability can be reduced. It is very rare that a case can go up to the final determination. And I have discovered one thing we have, which is very common among lawyers. They think if you consent, then you are weak. I don't think so. Consenting to me means you've understood that this is correct, this is wrong. And you are able to convince your client that, the route we are taking will not take us anywhere. Because if you know what you are telling your client will believe in you. So consenting is not a sign of weakness. So the ADR and then the mediation at TAT, that will help us a lot. But the first important thing you need to do to your client is you need to guide them on compliance. There is what we call compliance audit or compliance visit. You go to your clients and ask them, can I have a look at your payroll? Can I have a look at your payroll figures, the ledger figures, in your profit and loss account? Can I have a look at your balances in the profit and loss account and what you file in your return with URA? Just from that, you will be able to help the client navigate and get out of so many problems which could have happened. So the most important thing is we need to guide our clients on compliance. We need to take them through the risk they are going to face in certain areas of their transactions. And then the second thing we need to do as legal advisor is actually expert representation. We need to get people who understand tax. to represent these people. I have gone to court, I have seen people who go to court and treat tax matters as if it is human rights. And they urge you on the human rights. They are violating his rights. They are violating his rights. Tax is a compulsory levy. It is imposed. So if you go through that angle of human rights, you may miss the point. And then another thing is strategic negotiations.
Yes.
I have negotiated with the URA for so many cases, even cases which look to be impossible. If you know how to negotiate, you will always come out with a win-win situation. Not everything should go to court. There are people at the URA who listen. They have a department, I think it's called ADR, which is now very big. They listen a lot. By the time you leave ADR of URA and you go to Tax Appeals Tribunal, and again, you still fail to conclude at the mediation of Tax Appeals Tribunal, then that case must be very complicated. But if you are good at negotiations, at that point, you should be able to conclude it. At the end of the day, you will reduce the cost your client is going to pay. For example, someone has charged $350 per hour. Now, if I represent you for more than 10 hours, it will be very expensive for our taxpayers. So it is better to get those strategic negotiations skills which will help us resolve these things. Because let me take an example of if you go to TAT, you can take TAT is now very fast. Maybe you take 6 months. Then from TAT again, if you disagree, you go to High Court. That will be 2 years. If you disagree there, you go to Court of Appeal. That will be 3 years. The Supreme Court now, they sit once in a year, probably, on tax matters. So it will take you 10 years. I know of cases which have taken up to 10 years. There is this simple case of whether terminal benefits of employees should be taxed. That case went up to Supreme Court, I think. It was one of the simplest cases, which even a student of East African School of Taxation on week 1 cannot even go to court with it, cannot proceed to court. But somebody insisted and went up to Supreme Court and lost. There's another one. There's even another one coming up, so you see. So we need experts in these areas. Not everybody can handle tax. You can see from our numbers here. You go to the other, if you check in the other rooms, it's full. But because this is for experts, so you need expert representation. I think that's what I can say.
Wow, thank you so much, Mr. Kenana. You need expert representation if you're going to have effective tax planning and risk mitigation. Now, I am almost being guided by a script from the panelists. Now, you don't talk about expertise in tax when tax laws are changing every year and you don't know what the changes are. And the people sometimes, I'm told or I've heard that the people who could be behind some of these changes could be the people like Barbara who have identified lacunas or gaps in implementing the law, and then changes are proposed. Barbara, whom now, for those of us who are joining us, I can officially add the title of Nalongo. Tax laws are always subject to amendments, literally almost on an annual basis. And there are usually key changes that could have huge compliance implications. Mr. Ken has just told us you need to visit your clients and probably do an audit visit, a compliance visit. But when the laws are changing and there are compliance implications, these are to both the businesses but also the tax authority. Would you, since we are talking about what is trending, could you probably highlight for us what could be the recent, in the 1 or 2 years, key amendments we need to be aware of? Friends, we said in 1 hour you can't discuss everything about tax. Thank God we have the East African School of Taxation. There is much more to learn. But just those highlights that we need to be aware of as we open up shortly our Q&A, the online audience. Thank you for the questions. Keep them coming. We'll be winding this up in the next few minutes. Barbara, you're welcome.
Thank you so much, Laston. Before I say anything, more to what Mr. Kenneth said, We have ADR. It's a fully fledged division right now, headed by an assistant commissioner. We just got the approvals to make it bigger. So we welcome all our taxpayers. You can tell all your clients. Unfortunately, the URA has about 700 running cases, and we would love to resolve them. So many are more than 10 years old in courts of law. We want to resolve them. What I can encourage you and your clients is whenever you come into the URA, please come with documentation. It's very, very difficult for the URA to accept a position without a taxpayer at least providing some evidence. If you say this is what I earned and not this, at least just bring some evidence so that the team has a starting point. We have somewhere to start from. Even if it's not ADR, even if it's a mediation before the tax appeals tribunal, we need documentation to be able to look at it in order to review. Because tax is a creature of statute, it's literally impossible to just negotiate and say, okay, now it's not going to be 400 million US dollars, or it's not going to be 3 billion, it's going to be 1 billion without any evidence to that effect. And I think it will also help the clients. I'm just going to highlight a few of the policy changes. There are very many, but I'm going to try and highlight a few, maybe in 10 minutes. For the Income Tax Act, these changes have been made to, of course, foster growth of our economy to ensure that we take our nation out of economic dependence, but also we have a target of 31.574 trillion for the financial year 2024-2025 to collect. So some of the changes are geared towards revenue collection, but some are also exemptions because we've had the cry of so many people. So we try to make sure that we balance and ensure that the businesses are not just run down. So for the Income Tax Act, we've amended, this is 2024, we amended the definition of a retirement fund to ensure that it's broader and it's in line with the Uganda Retirement Benefits Regulatory Authority Act so that there's no contradiction. We've also, like Mr. Kenna hinted on it, there's an amendment where we've more of adopted the double taxation agreement definition of a permanent establishment. So instead of a branch now, we've replaced it with the term a PE. And this permanent establishment, it's in line with Article 5 of most of our double taxation agreements, which we are still renegotiating at the moment because, you know, most of them, for example, Mauritius DTAs were signed in 2004, and so much has changed. Like my colleague said, Jet, we have the OECD. They've come up with so many new things with the G20 and the all-inclusive framework. And this is mainly geared towards fighting base erosion and profit shifting BEPS. So there are some action points of the OECD that we are trying to implement. So this amendment is basically just targeted at non-residents who source income from Uganda and do not wish to pay taxes. We want to put them under the tax bracket. There are some exemptions that have been included for income derived by venture capital funds. We also have income derived from the disposal of government securities on the secondary market. This is now exempt. We've expanded the list of listed institutions in the Income Tax Act. We've included African Reinsurance Corporation and also included International Regulatory Board of the East African Power Pool. Then Islamic Corporation for the development of the private sector. It's now a listed institution. We've also added 10-year exemption. These are strategic exemptions for the manufacturers of electric vehicles, electric batteries, the charging equipment for these vehicles. So basically, we're just trying to ensure that we promote growth of this particular industry in Uganda by granting this exemption. We also have exemptions for operation of specialized hospital facilities. For the VAT, I'll also summarize. For VAT registered employers, if you give gifts or donations to your employees, this is treated as a taxable supply subject to VAT. If you're a recipient of proceeds of an auction, a person who receives the proceeds of an auction, you're required to account for VAT on this transaction if the auction relates to an item that's subject to VAT. So we've also, I'm going to try and summarize. I don't know how much time I have. We've increased the threshold for VAT refund claims from 5 million to 10 million shillings. So you can only apply for the refund where your overpaid tax exceeds 10 million. I wanted to highlight the digital services tax. I won't go into the amendments to the stamp duty and excise duty. This can be provided for especially the items therein. But the digital services tax, this was introduced effective 2023. That was the Income Tax Amendment Act of 2023, effective 1st July. So we introduced a 5% digital services tax, and that was mainly geared towards the multinational companies to ensure, for example, if I buy an item, I know the ladies like to shop on Amazon and maybe through Salabed, or so we're just trying to make sure that those companies that are not in Uganda but source income from Uganda are brought within the tax bracket. So that's the whole point of the digital service tax. It's met a lot of resistance, but surprisingly, as at 30th April 2024, we were able to collect 23 billion just from this digital services tax. So those non-residents are required to file returns and declare their income, which they've actually been doing. We've been able to bring them on board. We have under domestic taxes, we have international taxation section that has been engaging these taxpayers to ensure that they comply with these provisions. So this digital service tax is also in line with Pillar 1 and Pillar 2, OECD, all-inclusive framework G20. Basically, just trying to ensure that we bring these companies, the MNEs, the multinational, in those non-resident companies that don't want to pay tax here, trying to make sure that they pay tax in Uganda and they don't erode our tax base. We have some cases in court in this regard, not so many. Interestingly, we've been able to resolve most of the disputes with the multinationals. We just have a few right now, I think, in the High Court. And the argument really, they are saying they do not have permanent establishments in Uganda, so they should not pay tax in Uganda. So as you advise your clients that are multinationals, they should know that the definition of a permanent establishment is now in the Income Tax Act. So especially for the oil companies, if they have an oil well, if they explore, if they extract oil, if you have offices where you conduct business from, all those will be PEs and you'll be deemed to have sourced income in Uganda. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Barbara, you have almost sparked a hot discussion online. Alex already, I see Alex Resida. This is a question I'll pose to you, and then you'll come back later and you answer it. He's asking, what is the position of URA on WTO agreement on customs valuation? You can see that in tax they can throw you anywhere. So why is it not followed? Is there a breach by not complying with the WTO agreement in this regard? Mr. Kena, you already have many disciples, as you can see in this room, and I can also report to you that online we are over 60 people attending this. And one person is saying, and this is none other than Damba Hakim Bule, is saying, I request we schedule and have an entire session solely on transfer pricing. So there is eagerness to learn, but I'll resound it again. I don't know if I'm going to be paid anything for announcing the East African School of Taxation, but in case you want to learn more, there are many avenues of training. There are many avenues of training. Andrew Mukasa, just before I invite the chair on something interesting on resolution of disputes before the Tax Appeals Tribunal, Andrew Mukasa is saying tax is a specialized area of practice. He's agreeing with you, Mr. Kena. As tax practitioners, we must continuously improve and also assist each other with knowledge sharing. That's why I believe that we have many people attending online, and thank you for the people that have joined us in this breakaway session in the room. Andrew further says, let us also embrace ADR. Thank you for giving us that further information. Barbara, on the ADR department, URA, the ADR mechanism, both within URA and at the Tax Appeals Tribunal. It is quick, voluntary and good for relationships between government and taxpayers, including their representatives. I've been very astonished by hearing Mr. Kena talk about the need to have negotiation skills when it comes to resolution of tax disputes. But Madam Chair, if I may bring you in here, because we are well spent for time. Any taxpayer's hope, like Mr. Kena said, if you fail to resolve in those audit, reconciliation meetings and ADR meetings, any hope for a taxpayer who has failed to resolve a difference with the tax authority, who has been given an objection decision, will find themselves before the tribunal with assessments and audits, among others. And what we want to pick from you, the good thing, you're very fresh from the private practice, now you're at adjudication. Would you share some thoughts, Madam Chair, on how the Tax Appeals Tribunal is prepared to continue to fairly adjudicate the complex? We are not talking about the ones which Mr. Kena said, any first-day student at the East African School of Taxation can resolve certain tax questions. But the complex tax matters, is the tribunal prepared to balance the interests of the state and the interests of the taxpayers? Because sometimes it's difficult to see whether the tribunal is still impartial, at least from the feedback, until the dispute has ended and people have received rulings and these rulings are in their favor. So how is the tribunal prepared? If we can share some thoughts from your end, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Laston. I think just to remind our audience that the role of the Tax Appeals Tribunal is to resolve tax disputes between the Uganda Revenue Authority, which is government, and taxpayers. And we do that in a manner that is independent, fair, and impartial. We are independent of any organ of government, any institution, any person or authority. So that is our mandate as a tribunal. So you use the word complex, but complex according to whom? Because what is complex, what may appear complex to you, or not, what may not appear complex to you, is complex to a small business, yes, to an SME. And if you profile the taxpayers in this country, the majority of them, in what bracket do they fall? Complex, I think according to what you mean, is the multinationals. But the reality of our economy and the disputes that we handle at the tribunal is that the majority of them are filed by SMEs, small, medium enterprises. And 70%, more than 70% of our disputes are on average, the average tax in dispute is around 200 million shillings. Not the 5 billions, not the 10 billions, no. The majority of them are small. And that really gives you the profile of the nature of businesses or the simplicity of our economy and our tax system. So, as a tribunal, how do we then support dispute resolution? And from where we stand, context is always important, context and perspective. Many times you have people tell you, oh, in the USA they do this, or in Europe, in the UK, this is what is done. But you need to contextualize the economy of Uganda. So if I have a matter before me and it relates to a small business, should I hold that business to the same standard as a multinational enterprise that can afford to hire the best accountants, qualified? The majority of the businesses in Uganda are owner-managed. Small businesses, family-run businesses where the owner is the accountant, is the legal officer, is the compliance officer. So when that kind of business has a dispute with the revenue authority and they come in front of you as a tribunal, what do? Most likely they're not going to have audited financial statements. If they have receipts for their transactions or invoices, you're going to be lucky. So you can take the hard and fast approach and say, you know what, you're not compliant, so your case is dismissed. Or you can help them understand the importance of corporate governance, the importance of documentation, and then refer them to mediation or to ADR, where there's a process where the parties sit together and conversations are held with this business to help them understand the compliance regime. That way, even when the taxpayer leaves and they have paid a tax liability of 50 million, 100 million, they live in a better place than one who came and you merely dismiss their case because you are applying hard and fast rules uniformly. So it's very important that you contextualize the dispute. You can contextualize and bring perspective to the case, and you look at this business. What is the nature of this business? What industry do they operate in? How advanced are they? And that really helps you look beyond what is on paper, and you actually help address what the issue is.
Yes.
Which brings me to the point of education and sensitization. Tax education, tax sensitization is a must, and the UR is doing a good job on that, but it's not enough. There's a lot that needs to be done to sensitize our business community, to educate our business community, the tax people, the accountants, I mean, the entire business world in Uganda on compliance, on documentation, so that you are supporting, you know, compliance and tax collection. Because if you apply hard and fast rules, then you're going to throw out the baby with the bathwater. So it's very important to bring that kind of context and perspective to tax dispute resolution.
Wow, thank you so much, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, that is very refreshing to hear, because sometimes the taxpayers or any taxpayer coming to the tribunal almost feels already beaten. But where there is a humane approach to where there are issues, you give the guidance that there is a way you can get help. But you threw a question back to me when you asked who determines what is complex. Me, I don't have 25 years of experience. I'm going to pass it on also to Mr. Kenna. Who determines what is complex? And the reason as to why I'm doing so is that we may want to understand, we are talking about what is trending. And Mr. Kenna, you have talked about strategic negotiations, strategic approaches to tax dispute resolution. What are the emerging issues when it comes to tax litigation?
Maybe I'll start with the guideline that the third people gave us this year. I know many of us are not aware of this, but as you may be aware, on 24th April this year, we got a new chairperson for the Tax Appeals Tribunal, who is with us here. And immediately she came in, they introduced some new TAT guidelines. And many of us are not aware of these guidelines. And then we go to TAT, sometimes we find we're doing the wrong thing. Yeah. So I need us to address our minds to the new guidelines. For example, there is this guideline that the tribunal will now proceed ex parte or dismiss an application where the respondent or the applicant respectively are not in court room on time. So again, we need to be on time. This is not like the High Court or other courts where you can come 1 hour later. These people keep time a lot. So we need to be there on time. And normally, when I go there, I have to be there 5 minutes before. So the second thing they have introduced is that if you are unable to attend, you have to inform them via email. And then the third thing they have introduced is that all hearings shall be physical. Evidence will no longer be heard virtually. So those are the new changes which you should know as tax practitioners. Now, what is trending now? What is trending in tax? The most, I think number one is that there is now increased scrutiny on cross-border transactions. And what I have realized is that every country is trying to reduce or to safeguard against profit shifting and eroding of base. which is being done by most of these multinationals. So that's the new trending thing. Every country is now very strict and very alert to that. And then the second thing which is trending is that compliance with the OECD BEPS framework. I have seen in our Income Tax Act, we have now started domesticating certain provisions of the BEPS. I think Section 25, that one on EBITDA, is from action point number 4, I think. So you can see now what used to be international law is now being put in our Income Tax Act, word by word. So we are moving to a global taxation now. Our domestic tax is becoming global. And then the next thing which I'm also seeing is the requirement for documentation, especially on transfer pricing. There is now a requirement that we must have our transfer pricing policies given to URA every year. We used not to bother about this. I think in the last 2-3 years, that's when now it has become very serious, that everybody must have a transfer pricing policy if you are dealing with associates or sister companies. And then another thing which is also coming up is the digital taxation now, what we call the DST. And this is creating a lot of conflict. Today, before I came here, I was looking at some interesting story about Canada and USA, and then the UE. Canada has imposed tax of 100% on electric cars from China. They have also have the same problem on electric cars, which are Americans, but made in China. Then the same electric cars, if they are sold in the UK, but made from China by a UK company, will also attract tax at that level. So you can see that countries are now trying to fight that jurisdiction injustice when it comes to taxation. And then another thing is the issue of redefining permanent establishment. We also picked it from the OECD, and it is now in our Income Tax Act. So to me, those are the in things now.
Thank you very much. And when you talk about moving towards globalization, that sends my mind to John. John, what are the trends when it comes to international taxation? Yes, wherever we are, where we have signed up international instruments, where we have adopted international rules, we are domesticating them, but also there are certain practices globally that are influencing our tax policies locally here. What are the trends when it comes to international taxation, John? I have quite a number of comments coming in online and questions. We are coming to the end of 1 hour, which is already over well spent. Mr. Philip Karugaba, I've seen your comment. You'll allow me paraphrase it. He says we're already aware of the rules. We are waiting for the publication in the Gazette. There is Damba Hakim is saying the biggest rope in SME's necks is the 30% upfront payment. Madam Chair, you said you're a mother, you're humane when the taxpayers come. There is that 30% and then argue later. Can the same ever be revised or made favorable for a local taxpayer? For example, maybe exploring payment in installments, something to make it favorable for the taxpayer. And it's good Barbara is here. I'm aware there are certain arrangements when it comes to that 30% that URA has explored. Sarah is saying some businesses are still facing the impact of COVID-19 pandemic and therefore still limping. Are there any special considerations for such businesses by the tax authorities? Ladies and gentlemen, good things end when they are still hot. So we are just getting to the end of our panel discussion. Those are some of the thoughts that are coming through online. We are likely also to pick some hands from the audience that is here for the people who joined us much later as we come to the end. But I want to bring in John here on what are the trends when it comes to international taxation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. From an international tax perspective, what we are seeing is every country is struggling to find revenue to finance government expenditure. That's a problem that cuts across everyone. And they are looking at how do we collect or finance these expenditures. It has to be from tax. And many countries like Uganda have a lot of debt that they have to finance. So you find that each country is trying to figure out how do we tax these cross-border transactions. And as business models evolve quickly, faster than government rules, you find that there are so many gaps that lead to tax leakage. Or some people who have been clever, they create structures that lead to little or no tax paid in the country of source. So it's a problem that affects everybody, and countries have come up with a number of mechanisms or ways to deal with it. And one of them is the Global Inclusive Framework, where most of these developed countries have seen their revenue base. They have a multi-billion-dollar company in their country, but because it has cross-border transactions, the revenue it collects from outside that country are moved to a tax haven where there's little or no tax. And Uganda has been one of those countries that have had the pain of seeing revenue collection disappear. You might have heard the case of Zain, where URA failed to collect about $85 million in tax on capital gains. Of course, $85 million for Uganda, that's huge. But for more developed countries in Europe or US, that's little money. For them, they are targeting billions of dollars in tax. So they have come up with the inclusive framework of Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 to see how to allocate profits to the countries where the income is generated. That's one. Two is some countries had adopted harmful tax practices. That is, those countries that are considered to be tax havens, where they encourage you to set up in their country. You don't have an actual business there, but you register from there, and you move your intangibles to that country. They tell you that instead of paying this percentage of tax, you're going to pay zero or nothing, because they are targeting foreign direct investment to come into their country. So that led to a lot of tax competition, whereby as a multinational, you're making a decision of where should I set up as my headquarters or regional office. So countries, in the bid to attract those multinationals, they brought their tax rates at zero or very minimal. And that was termed to be harmful tax practices because they are not sustainable. So you find that a number of countries have ganged against these countries, that they need to change their rules. And you find that a number of countries that have been classified as tax havens, they have started to change the way they approach these multinationals when it comes to local tax compliance and regulations. So that has led to, if you talk of, say, Mauritius, before you could get a tax residence certificate that you're tax resident in Mauritius easily. But today, you have to demonstrate a number of aspects. You have to have substance in Mauritius, for example, because they don't want to be flagged as a tax haven. So meaning that as tax practitioners, as you do tax planning or tax structuring, you need to make sure that as you advise your clients based on Ugandan law, based on international tax law, you need to look ahead as well to see where are things going. Am I setting up a structure that is future-proof or that is flexible enough, that is adaptive, that in case there are changes, I can easily flex it. Then the other aspect is access to information. Tax authorities cannot do much of revenue collection without information or access to data. So that has meant that as you find that URA sometimes struggles to get information from taxpayers, and especially if information is outside Uganda's jurisdiction, but it has an impact on the determination of tax in Uganda. So countries have come up to say, we need to have a mechanism for sharing information. So that's when now we talk of automatic exchange of information. And as Uganda, we have adopted the rules already in place that empower URA to access information and also to share information with other tax authorities. And as we speak, plans are already in process to make sure that the practical implementation aspects of banks providing information to URA and URA being able to transmit it to other tax authorities and URA being able to receive that information. That means that people who hide behind opaque structures and derive income without paying tax, this system of exchange of information is likely to get into their net. Then the other aspect is indirect or direct disposal of businesses. This has been a challenge whereby, because of clever structuring, instead of you set up, let's say, 5 companies in different countries. Yeah. So you have, say, in Africa, let's say, in 5 countries, you have different companies operating, but under a structure, say, based in Netherlands or Mauritius, because they have a favorable tax regime. But you are not, you don't originate from that country. You come from some other country. So what was happening is countries were losing a lot of revenue, whereby the sale of the businesses, once they have grown and accumulated a lot of gains, they sell them at the holding structure level without directly selling the shares in the local subsidiaries, let's say in Uganda. So what happened, this was an issue that had not been part of BEPS, but it was found to be a major problem for developing countries. And the IMF, World Bank, and the UN, and the OECD came up with a toolkit to guide countries on how to deal with this issue to prevent flight of capital without paying the fair share of tax in the respective countries. So Uganda adopted one of those recommendations, whereby if you sell directly or indirectly a company in Uganda by 50% or more, capital gains tax will be paid, regardless of whether you pay yourself voluntarily or not. At least URA has the mandate now to come to the company, the subsidiary, directly to say, look, we are aware you sold at group level, you changed ownership, we want this tax. And URA we have seen implementing this. So as practitioners, you need to be aware that as you advise your clients, not to think that because it has been sold at holding company level, yes, there is no transaction, money changing hands at Uganda level, then you're safe. This rule will catch you, so you need to advise your people accordingly. Then the other aspect is double taxation agreements. A number of disputes are coming up whereby, because of adopting a number of rules in our local tax legislation, yes, for example, digital service tax. You have a company, say, based in Netherlands. There's a double taxation treaty, but you have DST or digital service tax requirement under the Income Tax Act. So if now this person is saying that, look, under the double taxation treaty, you can only tax me when I have created a permanent establishment in Uganda. And when I look at the rules in the double taxation treaty, I don't fall within the PE category, and therefore, don't tell me about your DST. I'm sorry.
Mr. John, I love the acronyms you're using, BEPs, PE, DST. So that is what tax is like. What seems like a very short acronym, every time you mention BEPS, I'm seeing the people online here, as you're talking about base erosion and profit shifting. Some of them, the images they are posting, don't at all interpret what you're saying. But friends, that's what we are saying, that there are many things that are trending, both domestically and internationally when it comes to tax and tax practice. Andrew Mukasa here online says, thank you to the panelists. Let us further the tax policy discussions, even in other platforms for the good of our country and future generations. Earlier on, Nalongo Barbara told us she's an anointed tax collector, not like Matthew, but she says that tax chose her. So that is why we have platforms such as the Uganda Law Society Tax Cluster. If you want to learn much more, join them. The tribunal, I am very much aware, it has in fact gotten into the habit of organizing stakeholder platform engagements. When you hear these calls, join in and have the discussions of so much more than what we can handle in under 1 hour. The organizers of the annual law conference have made sure that our moderators, the chair herself, Madam Crystal, Barbara, and also John and Mr. Akena are available even after this breakaway session. There are things that we are not able to discuss due to time, but they are readily approachable. At least I've approached most of them. They are readily approachable and ready to have a further discussion with you. There is another session that is, I think, supposed to be in this room, and I'm way past their time. Otherwise, you've been an excellent audience. I see their hands up, but I'm really pressed for time. I never want to be a moderator who is not mindful of time. So I would request, it's a question going to any of the panelists. They are readily going to be available to have that chat. Join the ULS tax cluster, join those platforms where we are discussing tax. My kind apologies, we've not been able to even answer the questions online due to time. But like we said, this is just sparking a discussion. We are not resolving everything today. You've been a very wonderful audience. I'm just going to invite our panelists to give us their parting shots, and we'll call it an evening for that. And I'll begin right with my John, who is next to me. We'll go in that order. John, you're welcome. Your parting shots in a minute.
Thank you very much. My parting shot is made around, as tax practitioners, we need to keep up to date and we need to consult each other. None of us knows everything. We learn from each other. Do not sweat throughout the nights alone. You are not alone in this. If you struggle with something, know that someone else is struggling with the same or could have an answer. So I encourage that you reach out to colleagues to share any tax challenges that you might be facing. Through that, you'll be able to resolve issues much faster. And like Akena said, these things you need to learn. So I encourage you to please do not hold information from your colleagues. Even if you're, if I may call it, competing for the same client, please do not hold the information, because it's through exchange that we all learn. You'll find that I could not have learned without Akena sharing. But Akena, sometimes we compete on clients. That does not mean that I shouldn't give Akena a call, that Akena, I'm struggling here. I have this situation. Guide me. How should I go about it? So I encourage that spirit of working together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Consult each other. In tax, there is what we call mutual assistance. Mr. Kenna, you're welcome. Your parting shots.
Thank you very much. The only thing I need to tell the audience is that I have some good news. As East African School of Taxation, we have our new program, which has been approved by National Council of Higher Education for the next 5 years. So the course outline we've been having since 2008 has been revised. Now we have added transfer pricing as a subject starting this September. So there is no age limit when it comes to education. We have people who are 70 years and above. Tax is complex, it keeps on changing. Come and study. You cannot assume that you know tax, you must study it. So we are willing to help you, we are ready. We are opening both day and evening shift now because of the numbers. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Mr. Kenna. For the people online, you have heard that. Tax is complex, come and study. Study hard to show yourself. A tax practitioner approved with knowledge. Barbara, you're welcome. Your parting shots.
Thank you so much. Just to say, as we conclude, maybe two things, if I'll be allowed. First of all, the URA is recruiting. I encourage all of us to apply, those who are interested. We need lawyers, we need people in domestic taxes. We need so many people, there are about 600 jobs or so online, please. I know tax is quite complicated. Sometimes we fear the mathematics. I've gotten so used to the math and the graphs and the pie charts. I'm an expert at Excel. You can do it. If I can do it, you can do it. So just to encourage us to venture into something new, venture into tax. It might be tough in the beginning, but it is worth it, I promise you. And then I also wanted to state that we need to think like patriots. There is something, whenever we're at court, whenever the lawyers who are representing the other side come, we call them the Unpatriotic League, especially if they are representing an MNE or an entity that's saying they've sourced a lot of money in Uganda, but they're saying, no, we don't have any structure, we don't have any office, we do not want to pay any tax whatsoever. So we usually make a joke and say, oh, you Unpatriotic League. So just encourage us, let's think like patriots in everything that we do. Let's give the correct advice to our clients. Let's keep reading. I know the tax laws change literally every year, and it's easier for the other laws because you'll find the Companies Act has changed maybe once, Taxation Act has changed maybe once, has been the same since we were law school, and the Income Tax Act is just years. Sometimes you're in court and you actually have to tell the judge this has changed maybe 5 times, so you have to look for the law of 2010 and make sure you're not quoting the recent law. You have to quote the law as it was then and make sure you say as it then was. Otherwise, they'll get misled. So it's very interesting. It's very exciting. I welcome you all and thank you for listening to us.
Wow, thank you, Barbara. Yeah, that is worth clapping for. URA is recruiting what a Nalongo can do. You're a single lawyer with no children. You can learn Excel and you can practice tax, and then think like patriots and join the Patriotic League. Thank you so much, Barbara. The applications will be coming through. I'm sure people will be looking for you. And last but not least, we are going to be getting the parting shots from the chair of the Tax Appeals Tribunal, Madam Crystal. You're welcome.
Thank you, Laston. And I'd like to speak to the legal community here as professionals who are, of course, more in a better place or in a more advantage than your clients who hire you to represent them when there are tax disputes. That you need to get involved. Don't just wait for instructions to litigate for you to get involved in your clients' businesses. Your clients need your help. And a tax dispute does not start when there's an assessment that has been raised or you're being given instructions to come to the tribunal. It starts right at the time of compliance. So when you have a client or there's a taxpayer who is not filing their returns on time, who do not have supporting documentation for their transactions, they are inevitably beginning a dispute. And it escalates during the audit when they don't have information to provide to the Revenue Authority. By the time they come to the tribunal, there's only so much that we can do to help such clients. So as professionals, we should play our part in helping the business community become compliant so that we ease the process of dispute resolution. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Madam Chairperson. The keyboard warrior, Mr. Philip Karugaba, is saying, Neda Bossi, we are patriotic to the law. Damba is asking, when we share information, John, do we share legal fees as well? It's interesting. The chat is interesting, but our time is well spent. You've been an awesome audience. Thank you so much. We will make way for the next session, and there are still other sessions that are happening. Ladies and gentlemen, can we give a hand of applause to our panelists? And it's worth clapping for yourselves here as well as the online audience. Thank you so much, and we wish you a beautiful end of day one after the next sessions, and then a very beautiful day two of the annual law conference tomorrow. Thank you so much, and God bless you.